Hi, everybody. Welcome to Tech Tuesdays. I'm going to give everyone a minute to log in from the waiting room, and that will give me a chance to start up the closed captions. So just give us a minute here. Okay, the closed captions are up, so you should see a red live button on your screen, and you can click on that to see the closed captions in a separate window. I'm also going to put that link in the chat. All right, welcome to Tech Tuesdays number 5, everybody. We are back with Charlotte Waters today. She is going to be presenting about virtual legal clinics, media outreach, and rural outreach. I'm Christy Baglow, the Director of Statewide Training at Florida Legal Services, and I'm glad you could join us this afternoon. If you missed any of the other Tech Tuesdays, they are up on our YouTube page, and I will put that link in the chat once we get started. So thank you so much to Charlotte for presenting today, and thank you to the Public Interest Law section of the Florida Bar for co-sponsoring this and getting our CLE approved so quickly. Thank you, Cabral. So I will have that for you at the end of the webinar. I think I already mentioned the closed caption link. That's also in the chat, and this is being recorded and will be put up on YouTube later in the day. So Charlotte is joining us today, and she's the communications manager at Legal Services of North Florida. So I'm really excited to learn from her today. And I have to tell you guys, doing these Tech Tuesdays has made me want my own tech team and my own communications team. So putting that on my wish list for next year. So welcome, Charlotte.
Hi, everyone. I'm glad to be here. Thank you, Christy. So I can go ahead and take it away if we're ready. All right, so let me do the awkward sharing of the screen. And we can go ahead and get started. All right, so I'm going to talk to you guys about virtual legal clinics, outreach, and rural outreach. So I have a lot packed into this. Hopefully, I either see this going by way too fast or taking a long time. So I'll try my best to get through everything. But I wanted to give you guys a little bit of a background on me. So I'm Charlotte Waters. I'm the communications manager for Legal Services in North Florida. I've been with LSNF for about 3 years. I previously supported the fundraising events department, a little bit in the pro bono department, and then we moved me over into communications and marketing, which was very timely since when we moved me over 2 years ago, it was when Hurricane Michael hit. So it was quite the learning experience. I am not an attorney, but I come with about 15 years of background in the nonprofit world, from arts and culture to different social service organizations. I've been supporting media and PR and content management through that whole process. So I hope to learn from you guys as well. I hope to be able to answer as many questions as possible. And if not, I have my information at the end of this presentation. So if there's anything I can't answer or I can follow up on, I'm happy to, or I'd be happy to connect with anybody after this is over. So kind of just really brief overview. We're going to talk a little bit about virtual legal clinics. We'll talk about types of clinics, some resources and lessons learned that LSNF has found. We'll talk about media outreach and the different types of outreach, communication tools, and creating media relationships. And then, as I said, we're going to talk a little about Hurricane Michael and what it was like to work in rural areas, especially using unconventional methods as well. I do want to take a minute after each of these sections to take some questions, since there are 3 very different, could be different topics, so I want to make sure I don't miss anything. So virtual clinics, why is it important? Obviously right now during COVID, we are being, we're being inundated with asks and needs to be available online. Some of us have already been doing that. I think for LSNF, it's been in some ways very easy to transition. In some ways, it's been very difficult. And so hopefully we can kind of talk about what we've learned, what we've been doing. I've been incredibly impressed with what organizations have been doing across the country and in Florida to develop some kind of educational outreach tools, whether through clinics or informational sessions online, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So I'm kind of breaking this into 3 different areas of virtual clinics. We've got what I call, and I'm just defining these people may use different language, but just for the purposes of this presentation, I define them as informational clinics, which are short form, short videos. We've been utilizing live platform to do this. This is really helpful to get timely information out to the public quickly. You know, there's a new moratorium. How do we get the information out there? I find that it's really easy. Some of it is getting your team involved and interested in it. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But the beauty of it is we are not trying to do intakes. These are sessions to provide quick, maybe 2 to 7 minute videos of information, shareable content, and accurate content. The next is brief services clinics. These are probably clinics, legal clinics that we're most familiar with. That's when we are providing a direct service, we're helping them, we're providing legal advice. And so that is something that we are still in the process of learning how to transition, and I'm excited to kind of talk through what we've learned and what we plan on doing. There's different types of brief services since we've transitioned to online that we found. And so that is a little bit more intensive of a project to put together, and doesn't necessarily engage with the live platforms, the social media platforms, like maybe an informational clinic might. And then the final is educational clinics, which the reason I separate these out from information is because educational clinics are like your CLE-esque type clinics where you bring together a group of people who are experts in a certain area to provide a breadth of content to individuals who attend. So I kind of talked through informational clinics a little bit. Again, we use them as timely and quick content to the public. There's also some really great crossover when you're doing these clinics online. I think of it kind of like when you are doing an outreach table. When you are doing an outreach table, you're providing quick information. You may be doing some intakes at the clinic, at the table, but you're often handing out brochures, you're talking to people. So that's kind of like what I see the informational clinics as. These are quick impressions. So the reason why I think talking about video is so important is getting in front of people. I'm sure many of you wear many, many hats. So many of you may have heard, you know, what is a click-through rate and what are impressions and engagement online. And some of you are like, I just am trying to get in front of my clients. So there's multiple different people who wear multiple different hats. Not everyone has a communications manager. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background about why these short videos can be so helpful and influential when we put them online. So VTR is a view through rate. So those are users that are actually clicking on your content and viewing the content. You are going to have a higher viewing rate the shorter the video. I'm sure many of us are fall victim to that as well, where we see a video that's 10 minutes long, and if we are not caught in the first 10 to 15 seconds, we are on to the next video. Although we have probably a lot of attorneys who have a longer attention span than I do, so that may be different. This is something very important to look at. This is something you can also see on YouTube channels, on Facebook, all of those social media channels and platforms. You can see what your VTR is. So another reason why video is important, these are some just really great stats. 58% of consumers visit a brand's social media page before visiting their website. So people go to your social media page. We saw a huge uptick in people accessing our Facebook page after Hurricane Michael. They weren't necessarily going directly to lsnf.org. They were looking up legal aid near me, LSNF Florida, in the Facebook search platform. So that's something to consider. When we're talking about who's using it, so we have 73% of adults use YouTube. That's really important. A majority of those are 15 years old through 25, which is technically, I guess, 15 as an adult. However, Pew Research has found that there is starting to be an increase in generation or age groups over 45 and even up into the 70s, 7-year-olds. So that is something to consider. If you're not doing video right now, consider what you can do video in the future. And then when we think about the construction of a video, especially informational videos, you don't have to get too complicated. You can stream live through Facebook. You can record a video and upload it to one of your social platforms. Again, we want to consider how you engage with them as quickly as possible in a video. So here are some stats. Are you getting people within the first 10 to 15 seconds? Is your video length past a few minutes long? When we're talking about legal clinics, I do think that we have a little bit of wiggle room when it comes to length of video, but I find that the longer the video, the shorter the view rate on that video. So just keep that in mind. You want to grab the attention and be clear with your content immediately with the video, and you want to keep it as concise as possible. It's a great opportunity to do a series. You can record all of it and then cut it into 10 videos that you put out over time. So two of the platforms that you can do for these informational clinics are Zoom and StreamYard. The reason I'm comparing these two are out of the different streaming platforms that I've utilized and researched, these are the two that I find are either easiest to access because we already have it, like Zoom, or they're very cost effective, which like StreamYard. So Zoom, as many of you probably have seen, you can stream to Facebook through Zoom. You can do that through using a webinar account. And so that's very helpful. It's very accessible. It means that if somebody signs up to watch an informational clinic or an educational clinic, then they can watch it through Zoom. If they don't want to go through that process or there's an access issue, if they have a social media account, they could just go to your Facebook page or YouTube page and see the Zoom video. Actually, with Zoom, it's just Facebook. You actually have to set it up. There's a little bit more technicalities to set up Zoom to stream to other platforms, which is a con, which is part of the reason why I liked the idea of StreamYard for informational clinics. So StreamYard is a platform that is free and or paid. And so the free version allows you to, and I'll show you on the next slide, this is what the StreamYard studio looks like. So all you have to do is, once you set up account, is invite the person that you want to speak about the information. So say you're doing a housing informational clinic and you just want to talk about the top 3 things you should know right now about housing or about evictions. All you have to do with StreamYard is start a new broadcast. You choose your platform and it can stream to multiple platforms depending on whether it's a paid StreamYard account or not. And you have the ability to do a lot of really great branding. You can adjust. You can see right under the picture of me, you see these little gray icons. There's different ways that you can show you and the panelists in the call with you. You can share screen with it. You can include video. So there's a lot of really great pieces that Zoom is great for presenting content and having meetings. StreamYard was built to stream these co-hosted and robust live feeds. So it's a great tool that I've enjoyed using and I've trained a lot of our staff on. And I'm very excited next steps where we're going to be launching quite a few of these informational clinics moving down. Now, if you want to do Zoom use Zoom for your Facebook Live, all you have to do is make sure that you're in a webinar account, and then as you can see where I'm pointing, you can go live. Oh, you can go live on YouTube now. I mean, that's new. So just as a heads up though, one of the things that many people don't realize is that they have to set this up on the back end. So keeping in mind, if you want to use Zoom and use it for Facebook Live, all you have to do is go into the admin account and allow permission for your social media account to be linked to this. Whoever is hosting the site does need to have admin access to your social media site. So for instance, I have admin access to the LSNF Facebook page, so I will join a clinics page as a clinics informational clinic, and I will join as a co-host and then share it because I have admin access. So that's a little bit about informational clinics and different ways that you can do that online. So brief services clinics. So the way that we identify brief services is a step beyond the educational information, and we're providing one-on-one help or advice with our own staff or having pro bono attorneys join. So there's two different types of clinics. We realized as we were trying to identify how to bring these clinics we do in person online, we realize there's kind of two different ways to do this. We can do these online clinics where we've already processed application and we've already done the intake process, or much like many of our clinics, people just show up. So those are two very different processes for setting up your clinics and managing your clinics. And we realized that's something that we had to be mindful of. So the first thing we'll talk about is how do we do a brief services clinic when we've already completed the intake? So that means that we've had the clients have called and done an intake over the phone or online, and our team has identified them as individuals who would benefit from a brief services clinic. So part of the process of setting this up, there's a few different processes. So many of you guys have used breakout rooms in Zoom, and many of you have probably already managed an event or a Zoom call where you've used the breakout rooms. In case you haven't, to create breakout rooms in a Zoom session, that just like the Facebook Live, you have to kind of turn that feature on in the background of Zoom. You have to do the same thing with breakout rooms. Unless that feature is essentially turned on your account, it's not something you can necessarily access immediately. So once you turn it on, you'll notice any affiliated accounts with the main admin account will then have an option for breakout rooms at the bottom of your Zoom call. As long as you're the host, you can see that. So one of the things that I suggest is practice with the breakout rooms. There's a few little wonky features about the breakout rooms. So for instance, you set up 4 breakout rooms, maybe there's an attorney in every single breakout room, and you allow your clients into the call one at a time. You admit them into this lobby waiting area. If you want to give a message out to all of the individuals or attorneys who are helping you, you can broadcast messages in Zoom, but those messages are one way. So if someone is in a breakout room, they can't message you in the main lobby, if you will. And that broadcasted message that the person in the lobby or the moderator sends out is seen by everybody. So you can't share confidential information. You have to be very mindful of the information that you're putting into those broadcast messages. So that's something that we've identified that we're looking to work around, which is why I suggest you really practice that Zoom call, especially if you're going to invite pro bono attorneys. Doing whatever you can to alleviate the stress of their learning by educating them on the outset is important. And then identifying the process or method that you're going to process those clients, which we kind of talked about. When you're doing a brief services clinic where intake is already completed, you've already set out to do the first part of that, which is the people who are receiving the link to this Zoom call have already been processed. They've already been communicated with. So this is done ahead of time. You can also, once you put the breakout room or you add breakout room as a feature to your Zoom account, you can actually set up your Zoom accounts when you set up this meeting. So that is something that's really helpful. It also allows you to organize before this clinic starts, which is very important. When you start moving clients around from room to room, you want to make sure that you have a very clear process at the very beginning. And one of the things that I also just suggest is having a gatekeeper in that lobby or main room where people first enter into the Zoom call. Part of the reason is that gatekeeper is responsible for sending these people from one room to another, and you want to make sure that you don't have any crossover. And so if your person in the main room is also doing intake, there could be an issue where that person is distracted, and you want to make sure that doesn't happen. So as I mentioned, as far as communication goes, what do you do when you're trying to communicate with people in Zoom, but you can't once they're in the breakout rooms? So one of the workarounds we use is we have Microsoft Suite. And so for anyone who's internal, it's very easy to communicate. You can use Microsoft Teams to communicate outside the organization. That's something you have to set up on your own. However, I was talking with one of our intake specialists earlier today, and I asked her, what do you do? Like, what if there's a pro bono attorney and you don't want to figure out the team situations, you use like Skype or something? And she actually said that a lot of pro bono attorneys are amenable to texting, and that's what she would prefer. I don't suggest using email because there is a lag. And so if you're trying to decide if John Smith should go over to attorney Clyde, you don't necessarily want to email attorney Clyde because it could take a few minutes, and by the time they respond, here you have someone who's just sitting there waiting to be seen. So finding a method ahead of time and communicating with the people involved what the communication style is going to be is super important. Okay, so here we go. Okay, so this is for clinics that you still need to do intake on. A lot of it is still the same, the setup, breakout rooms, communication styles, a lot of that's the same. What becomes a little bit more complicated is how do you do intake online? Like, how do you figure that out? And so there's a few different ways, and one of the ways that we've been playing with is this idea of utilizing the waiting room, which when you set up a Zoom call, you can choose to set up a waiting room. You can also choose a passcode as well. The waiting room is really helpful because it secures that lobby space, that main room. It secures who and how many people are in that space at a time. So I do think it's important. It's one of the things that Zoom also suggests for extra security is having that waiting room feature turned on. So ideally what you would have is someone, maybe a moderator, who is in that lobby, who lets or admits each client in one at a time. And then that person would then communicate with your intake staff who are in separate breakout rooms and your attorneys. So they would communicate with the intake staff, I have so-and-so, they're ready to go through the process of the application with you. That person would process them, notify the person in the lobby that that intake is completed, and then communicate about what kind of attorney or what attorney would be best to see. So if this is a housing issue, a family law issue. So it does take a lot of organization on the back end. You need to know what the process is of moving someone over from having completed the intake over to the attorney. You need to communicate with the attorney what are their areas or specialties of or areas of law that they prefer. So there's a lot of different pieces that are important to have ahead of time. You can also set up the breakout rooms to be named. So if you want to have housing as a name, public benefits as a name, consumer law, that might be an easy way for you to know where to send these intakes after they've been completed. One of the things we've also talked about is communicating better before the clinic and letting people know that if they call ahead and submit their application online or over the phone, we can expedite the process once they come into the actual clinic. So there's a few different techniques. We've also talked about building out some scripts for our intake staff so that when they do an intake, I'm sure anyone who has done an intake knows you want to keep it to 10 to 15 minutes. Sometimes that just doesn't happen. So creating ways to communicate with the person that you're doing the intake with so that they feel comfortable moving each client along so that you can help as many people as possible. So that's a little bit, again, very brief overview of 2 different brief services that we are looking at doing and different ways of utilizing Zoom, which most of us have had to use at some point to do these clinics and move clinics to virtual. So finally, educational clinics. That again is a longer form webinar style series. We've done some really wonderful clinics with partners in our area. So for instance, in the Second Judicial Circuit, I believe the next slide shows, this is one of the clinics that we did with the clerk of courts, with our judge, with 211 in the Big Bend. So it was a really great opportunity, and a pro bono attorney. So it was a really great opportunity to present really robust, wonderful content. And they did a fabulous job. They went over, I believe this was housing and evictions, and we were able to then share that content later. Now, I will say it's harder to get a longer view rate on these, but it is a really good resource when somebody has a question. It's great to put on your website. It's great to put on YouTube. It's also great to share with your partners in case they have to speak with a client in their own organization with whom they, maybe there's questions and they realize, you know, actually that's something legal services can help with in our area. So I find it to be very helpful, again, very robust, and a really great way to get all the content together in one clinic. The other really great thing about doing these clinics is that you can, through using social platforms and through using your website, to host these clinics online. So specifically informational educational clinics, you can get really wonderful information about engagement. And so I won't go into too much detail, and I can help answer questions later about it, but like I mentioned, when you do an outreach table and somebody comes by your table and picks up a brochure, you've engaged with that person, and maybe you count them as someone you've engaged with. If somebody walks by your table, they have seen your logo, they have seen who you are, they may not have engaged with you, but just merely by having walked by your table, they've been exposed to your organization. You can count very similar numbers online through impressions and engagement. And so it's a really great tool, especially if you need to justify the work you're doing and who you've reached online with any of your grantors. Okay, so that, I felt like that was really quick. It may not have been. Are there any immediate questions that hopefully I can answer about the virtual clinics?
Yes, thank you for all that good information, Charlotte. And at the end, I saw on your screen demonstration that you had 211 there. So that's something I love about the things I've been seeing online all over the state from legal aids, is that you're engaging with community partners and getting the word out about their services too. So that's pretty neat. Samantha just wanted to suggest that Slack is a good alternative to Microsoft Teams.
That's
And then
great.
we have a question. In Zoom, can the administrator or someone go into the breakout room and watch or listen without the attendees being aware?
No, if you go into a breakout room, you will be visible.
Okay. Too many breakout rooms, but I know the moderator can hop between the rooms and kind of visit each room if you need to do that.
They can. I would, again, depending on how much, I guess depending on how active the clinic is, I again caution, because you really do want your moderator to be as focused as possible. You know, I had this conversation with a few people who've done the clinics, and there's always that fear that they're going to send the wrong link or send someone to the wrong room. And so they're very, very cautious. And so I do say that I think it's important to make sure that whoever is your host lobby person kind of stays there, is living in that space during the clinic.
Okay. Got a compliment, great information. And then another question about StreamYard. Do you have to make an event on Facebook, or does it go automatically from StreamYard to Facebook?
Oh man, I should get paid for like how much I love StreamYard. I'm sure I won't like it at some point, but there's two really cool pieces to it. So if you set up a StreamYard, you set up a broadcast that you want to go to Facebook. If you set it up as a scheduled broadcast, the really cool part is it'll ask you to put in like a picture or some kind of pretty graphic, and it actually creates a social media post on that channel. So it'll create like a Facebook post with that graphic, and it'll say, you know, Legal Services of North Florida is going live in 1 hour. And that graphic will then flip to the video once you go live. The other thing is if you don't schedule it, it just goes straight to going live on whatever page, personal or organizational page that you have attached to that broadcast.
Okay.
Sort of that answers the question.
Once it gets streamed onto Facebook, or do you just kind of have to have someone moderating all the questions and comments and maybe?
Oh man, here, let me. I really should get paid for this. Okay, so on the right-hand side, you'll see past all the default brand content, you'll see it says comments, banners, brand, private chat. So comments, you can actually moderate all of the comments in this screen. So you don't have to leave the screen. So say for instance, I am hosting an informational session with you, Christy, and then we have someone who's not visible, just like a webinar where you can make someone not visible. They're not visible, but they can be moderating comments kind of like you are right now. So they can moderate comments from any of the platforms you're streaming to. So if you're streaming to Facebook and YouTube, then you can actually comment and respond to both in the same screen. Now, where it says private chat, that's where anyone who's in this studio setup can talk together privately. So, you know, the person that's helping moderate the comments can be like, hey, Charlotte, ask Christy about this. Or, hey, somebody keeps commenting about this. And it's a great way. So all you have to worry about is the private chat. You're not going to have to worry about all of the other comments coming in. And you can still manage it all within the same screen.
That's fantastic. I just wrote that down. I need to get to know StreamYard. I'm so glad we have this.
It's like $25 a month for the fancy version, which means you can set up, you see where there's an overlay of like live with StreamYard, you can overlay your own content and your own branding, and it's very economical, depending on the organization.
Okay, that was my ulterior motive for having Tech Tuesdays. I am not a tech expert, and everyone's doing such neat stuff, and I just wanted to share it and learn from it too. So we have one more question.
Okay.
Many of our clients either are not able to or are reluctant to use Zoom. Have you had any luck with people just calling into Zoom instead of using video for a clinic?
Absolutely. So we have had people call into Zoom. Like they haven't necessarily use their video. So it really just depends on the best way to process the individual. So I mean, technically, I'm sure many of us are doing intakes over the phone right now already, right? We're already doing our intakes through our phone lines, going through the application process. So it's not that dissimilar. And so that's certainly something that you can do. And we've had people call in for our webinars, not through video, which we couldn't see their faces anyway. And we've had them call in to just general clinics as well. And so it really is up to the comfort of the organization and any protocols that you have in place. And so I would say that's not an issue. I haven't had any of our staff raise that as an issue.
Okay, great. That's it for sections. So now we'll move on to media outreach.
All right, media outreach, the fun stuff. I mean, other stuff's fun too. All right, so I'm going to kind of go over what media outreach, what kind of tools we have at our disposal. And it means something different for everybody. Again, because we're all wearing so many different hats, media outreach might be only so much for some individuals. And there are some resources out there to make it easier for you as well, which I can go over. So I'm going to talk a little bit about common methods of communication and with media, when to use those methods, how to talk to reporters, journalists, and other resources. So There are three main areas that I'm going to talk about. What is a public service announcement, also known as a PSA? What is a press release? What is an op-ed? Those are probably three terms that you hear thrown around, interchangeable, all kinds of stuff. So I'm going to talk about them very briefly and give you some ideas of when it's relevant to use them. So what is a difference between a PSA and a press release, right? Like we hear that constantly. I interchange them incorrectly all the time, so don't worry. So a PSA is a short, quick segment about what's going on, your event, your clinic. Normally it's event focused. You want it to be a quick one-pager. This is an opportunity to tell the media what is going on, when it's happening, what time, how to access you. Does it cost money? And then just like a brief little description. You know, we're having this clinic at this date, online, through these resources. This is what we're going to cover. You can access it here. So it's also, I kind of consider it like your calendar content. Like what would you want to fit in a calendar? And then a press release is longer. You're looking at 1, 2, maybe 3 pages. Really, you should probably keep it to 1 to 2 pages. You're explaining more what you're doing. A press release is something that you send out a few weeks before an event, maybe a month before an event. Keeping in mind, because of the swiftness of media now, if you send a press release out too far in advance, it could get lost, which is why it's nice to combine these two pieces. You send out a press release, it maybe includes a quote from your director, it includes a quote from an attorney, it talks about the great work you're doing, it talks about the percentages of, you know, what's going on with a disaster area and how you can help with disaster legal help. So that you can send out a month out, maybe 3 weeks out, and then leading up maybe a week or less to the event, you send out that press release, or I'm sorry, the PSA. See, I already interchanged them, which is just a reminder to the media, hey, we're having this event. It's going to be awesome. Here's the key parts of it. Please tell other people about it so we can help more people. So that is an incredibly bare bones kind of basic differentiation between the two. So what about an op-ed? Where does an op-ed like fit into all of this? So think of an op-ed, well, technically, so op-ed is interesting. It comes from opposite editorial, and it's essentially a commentary piece, an opinion piece. And so an op-ed is an opportunity for you to draft and put research out there, opinion pieces out there. It's an opportunity for you to comment on a relevant topic. The media wants what you're giving to them to be relevant, to be timely, and to affect a large majority of people. And so they want to know, you know, that 15% of the population is affected by X measure. Now, obviously, those who have certain grantors, whether that's federal, state, local, or other grantors, you do have to keep in mind the language you use. You know, for instance, we are funded by Legal Services Corporation. I reflect back on their requirements to make sure that whatever we're writing is appropriate. But it is a really great opportunity to get a good piece of content out there to talk about your organization and the work that you're doing. And then sometimes we've definitely added a little piece about an upcoming event. So we talk about the work we did or we're doing, and hey, Law Day's coming up. You should come to Law Day. Here's a link to it. So sometimes we'll kind of like sneak in an event or something like that. And so a lot of times what happens with these pieces is staff will write it. So I may work with the director, or I may write it and someone else on staff will help with that process. And I essentially am ghost writing this content for somebody else to put their name on, which is very strange. I'm sure it feels very weird to do that. It's very, very common. I'm sure most of the op-eds you read were probably written by somebody else. But the idea is that's where partnership comes to play. That is a great opportunity to be like, all right, director, I'm going to put your name on this, read through this, make sure you're okay. Or hey, board member, or hey, donor. And it's a great opportunity for people to go, oh, I know that name. Oh, I think I've heard of that organization. Oh, cool, this is really great. So it's a really great way to use those partnerships and use people with the clout necessary to move your message and your brand along. All right, so how do we talk to the media? When we're in crisis mode, we're overwhelmed. I'm sure all of us have been in fatigued, overwhelmed mode for 6 months, but there are some really important pieces when thinking about the media and when the media reaches out to you. So some of the things we think are, I have to respond, I have to comment, I have to go on camera, I have to make time. You don't have to. Being mindful and deliberate about who comes to the table. Sometimes I get requests that I don't move along because they aren't relevant to the organization. I can tell that the journalist is asking or wanting a salacious story, and that's not something that I want to do. Or I want to vet that reporter a little bit longer because I'm not familiar with them. So maybe I go to a colleague or talk to somebody and I say, hey, do you know this person? I'm a little on the fence whether I can trust them. So take your time with that. Sometimes you get a call and you're like, by 3 p.m. I need an answer. And it's like, cool, I'll do what I can. So, but they are on deadlines as well, which is why they push. And sometimes legal aid organizations and law firms and other people, they're calling to try and get additional background info right before they release the article. So sometimes it can be a little pushy. I've worked with a few people who I love who are like that, and I'm very honest. And I go, I can't get that to you right now. And they know that I'm going to do the best I can to get the content I can to them, but they're also aware that I can't necessarily push a client towards them or push an attorney who's at a hearing to talk to them. So be honest with them within reason, letting them know our staff is fairly inundated right now. Unfortunately, we are helping as many clients as we can. And so I can speak with you tomorrow, but unfortunately today can't happen. I just don't have the time. And because you want to be careful about, and that kind of skips down to the last myth, which is I have to make a comment. You don't necessarily want to say no comment. I know that's something we hear. You want to be mindful of how you tell the reporter no. Saying no comment, what if you're working on you have a case, it's in the media, you say no comment. We all know what that kind of means in the media. So how do you say that without saying it? You can say something like, I'd like to provide on background content. On background means your organization may or may not be listed. You will not be quoted. You're providing background on whatever area. So for instance, maybe there is some legislation that is being pushed through and they want to understand the legality of it. You can say, well, what I can give you is information on if this as it stands goes through, here's how it will affect people. Here is the information we have right now. Here's what is the legal process right now. Here's what the legal process will look like. So it is important, especially if you're LSC funded, to be very mindful about those kinds of inquiries. And on background is a really great way to create relationships with reporters and journalists as well. So that's part of the trusting relationship. Off record, I don't think of off record as yes, it's a thing, but I try to be very careful with that. You need to have a very good relationship with the reporter or journalist to trust that something's off the record. I don't think that necessarily reporters are trying to be salacious or trying to do anything like that, but I do think it's very important if you want to keep that mindset, that you're very mindful of what you're saying and how it will reflect back on the organization. So make sure you have a really good relationship with the reporter before you do that, and just be mindful and consider everything you say on record. It's just easier, and it forces you and your staff to be more mindful of what they're saying. And so that kind of goes back to the on background. The more you work with reporters, the more they trust you, the more of a relationship you build, and the more that you can trust that you can have these conversations with the reporters and journalists. So I've made some really great connections in our area that I'm very happy with, where I can call and go, hey, I really want to do an educational piece on housing right now. And because I've provided them so much background info, they go, okay, yeah, we can fit you in at this time. And so I'm also very honest with them about our regulation. Listen, you can't, if you use this information in this way, it affects our funding. So I have to be cautious and I need you to respect that. I have found that reporters and journalists are very mindful of that and do not seem to mind when I am more cautious because of the regulations that I've explained to them. Okay, so I know I'm getting close to the end. So do we have any questions on media outreach?
Questions at the moment, just a couple comments about press releases. Front load your important information. Don't leave the best for last. Just like in a brief, you gotta get their attention.
That's nice, yeah. Well,
And
it's kind of like when we were talking about videos, how you want to engage immediately. Absolutely, PSAs, engage immediately and repeat yourself at the end. Make sure you get that info. That's great. Thank you for that comment.
And then, of course, be very careful about off the record gets violated all the time, which you mentioned. All right, moving on to rural outreach.
Yeah, okay. So rural outreach. So I'm going to be talking about this in the context of Hurricane Michael. And hopefully, I am sure we have some really great rural legal aid organizations in the state of Florida too, who probably can provide even greater content than this. So when we're talking about rural outreach, we're talking about populations that are not necessarily as accessible. They are not within, maybe it's difficult to get to our offices because it's so far away. They're in an area that doesn't have good public transportation. So there's a lot of different pieces to rural outreach. So what do you do when traditional methods fail? So I liken this to rural outreach because we found that the areas that were affected by Hurricane Michael, so many of them were rural, and normal ways of getting to them, even just a phone call, was so difficult after Hurricane Michael. And just a kind of brief overview. So right after Hurricane Michael hit, there was a brief moment where cell towers were working and then cell towers were out. And of course, we all kind of maybe some of us remember the controversy around that. And so it was difficult sometimes to even communicate with our own staff, let alone trying to communicate and work with partners and with clients. And so almost immediately after the storm hit, there was this really incredible partnership that happened where iHeartMedia came out to the one of the radio stations in Panama City, and they helped get them up and running. And a majority of the radio stations came together and DJ'd 24-hour emergency radio essentially for I don't even know how long, maybe a week or so. And I got an opportunity, I didn't realize this, my family lived in an area affected by the storm, so they were without power for about 30 days. And I went out to take care of the house and help them out. And I realized that the radio station, all of these radio stations came together. So it was a really unique opportunity. And so what I ended up doing is calling out to the radio stations, connecting with, there's a radio station that is owned by attorneys. And I asked them, is there any way if we're at a location, I can put stuff on social media, but right now I just don't guarantee that people know that it's there. So is there any way that I can tell you when we go somewhere? And all of them, I mean, it was right after a disaster, all of them were open to it. In fact, they were hungry for that information. So anytime I called the radio station, they announced it multiple times if we were going to be somewhere. We're in front of the library, we're at a disaster recovery center. So they would always announce it, which was phenomenal. And then I also connected with our emergency operations center in each of the counties, primarily in Bay County where Panama City was. And so what I did is I developed this really great relationship with the information officer. And every single night they sent out a PSA, like we talked about, that went out to community partners who could then tell people in the public what was going on. Where was their water? Where was their help? And so I could, anytime I knew the next day that we would be somewhere, I could get on that PSA that would go out to all of these partners. So it ended up being really wonderful to get the information out there. And then on top of that, we have this I mean, we have a phenomenal team. I mean, not to say our team's the best, but I'm a little biased. But we have really incredible, passionate people. And so when this happened, they immediately took to the ground to figure out how to get in front of people. And so by connecting with FEMA and creating that really great relationship, we were allowed to have essentially a table or sit at the Disaster Recovery Center. And that was wonderful because we could just be in front of people, which was the biggest piece of the puzzle. And so that kind of ties into this idea of partnerships. I'm sure many of you guys work very hard to develop these incredible partnerships with individuals. And right now it's very difficult because we can't necessarily always utilize the locations or spaces like we normally do. But those relationships can then, if you have a relationship with a library, is there a way to dedicate a space or a computer that you could do clinics or online applications through? And then finally, law enforcement community partners, I kind of mentioned that before. One of the things that our attorneys did was develop a did you know or a tenant's housing rights sheet. And they sent that out to all of the law enforcement of all of the affected areas. And that was a huge help, just merely to remind the community, here are the rights of the people in your community. And that was really helpful. It was also helpful for me because that's great content. I can use that content and just put it everywhere online. I didn't include social media on here, mostly because I see that as a traditional method right now when you're talking about rural outreach. However, I will add that social media has only gotten more and more impressive and more robust in getting that information out to the public, and we have really hit hard on getting educational content out through social media. So I'm sure many of us know that it's important, but I can't stress enough how helpful it is to get educational material out. And it's also really great to see what your impressions are with the public and how many people are viewing your content, again, which is really great for grantors. So another reason why these untraditional methods are really helpful is it helped us increase how many people we talk to. So when the season in which Hurricane Michael hit compared to the previous season, we increased by 65% our intake calls. So we more than doubled. Obviously, Hurricane Michael is a huge part of that. And I think these really incredible partnerships also helped us get in front of people so that people knew that we were trustworthy and that we could help them through this crisis. So that's it. That's everything. So any questions, comments, improvements?
Perfect timing. You got through a lot of information in an hour. I'm impressed.
Yeah.
We've gotten lots of compliments about all the helpful information. If anyone has questions, you can type them in the chat box or the Q&A box. And Charlotte has generously agreed to share her PowerPoint, so I'll send that out with the recording link tomorrow. You'll get an email from Zoom. And I'm also going to share the CLE information. Again, thank you so much, Cabral Banner at the Florida Bar, for pushing this through in time for the webinar. Hooray! So the CLE number is 4225. Again, that's 4225, and it's approved for one general and one technology CLE. And I will type that information in here while we wait to see if there are any questions. Okay, we have a question already. Are there any successful online clinics or services for rural communities?
All right, so when we ask successful online clinics, do we mean like people attending that are in rural areas, or just I want to make sure I understand how to answer that.
Yes, attending.
Gotcha, okay. So that would be hard to identify through Zoom without asking your clients, or say, so for instance, if you're doing a clinic that you have intake, then obviously you'll know where they're coming in from. If you're doing an informational clinic on social media, you can glean the demographics of where they're coming in from through the analytics that a lot of the social platforms provide you. If you're doing an educational clinic where you're providing all of this really robust kind of webinar through Zoom, you can get a list of the individuals who've attended. I don't know if you can get the demographics. So I will say that the best way to get that information is through, I know that many of the legal aids probably do a survey, and that's something that we haven't included in all of our online intakes that we're going to be, there are surveys included with intake. However, we want to be a little bit more specific about finding out where they're coming from and how they got to us. And so the best way to get those rural people, though, is to communicate with the partners that are in front of them. So that would be my kind of takeaway. I don't have it's not the best answer, but kind of a roundabout answer for you.
That's something I noticed doing outreach in the past is when you set up a separate legal clinic or a separate event, sometimes there are a lot more pro bono attorneys there than there are potential clients.
Yeah, you never know.
I hate it when that happens. So that's the perfect suggestion is partner with an event that's already happening that you know people are going to show up for. Hopefully there's more of a draw, like maybe free food or something more exciting than lawyers. That'll help get people there. And always bring candy. Always have candy at your table.
Food in general, it's just usually.
Yes, yes. I don't see any more questions, so I'll give everyone one more minute. I typed the CLE information in, but someone said it's not open until 10/29. You are exactly right. They must have made a mistake on the date. So I will see if Cabral can just get that fixed within their system. And I'll let everybody know in that email tomorrow when I send the recording and the PowerPoint. I'll let you know if you can claim it now or if you've got to put it on your calendar for next month. But thank you all for attending, and thank you so much, Charlotte, for all that great information. And thank you to LSNF for letting us borrow Charlotte for the afternoon.
My information will be on the PowerPoint too, so feel free to reach out if you have any additional questions that I may or may not be able to answer.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Lots of compliments. So make sure you read that chat box, Charlotte. Everyone loves it. All right. So if anyone wants to join us next week, we will be back here again with Tech Tuesday number 6. And I put the registration link in the chat, and I'll send that out tomorrow also. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Thanks again, Charlotte.
Bye, everyone.